The following program is made possible with support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation.
Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Faith Salie.
And I'm Heather Berlin. We're going to be reviewing current movies, TV shows, and sometimes checking out a blast from the past, but from a scientific point of view.
Today we're going to switch things around a little bit and look at a particular field of science and how it's used in the movies.
We're delighted to be joined by Dr. Vinod Menon, a City College professor of physics specializing in light. Let's start off by looking at light as a weapon.
Star Wars, Star Trek, and about a million other sci-fi movies use a beam of light as a weapon. Can light really do any of the things that, for instance, a lightsaber does?
Yes, the answer is yes. And you've probably seen that when you've ever taken a magnifying glass and shine sunlight onto it and burnt a piece of paper. That's a good example of a lightsaber in its most simplest form.
I hear that you have a lab full of lasers. Is this right?
Yes.
Like how many?
Well, I probably have about 6 or 7 big lasers and then a few small lasers lying around here and there.
All right, let's imagine that one of your lasers were strong enough to cut through the kinds of things that we see lightsabers slashing through in Star Wars. So specifically, let's say that you had a laser strong enough to cut through the security doors of a spaceship. How much power would that take? I mean, are we talking like an annoying blip on your electrical bill or a blackout in New York City?
Well, I kind of anticipated that you would ask what I could do, something damaging in the laser. So I did something. I actually had my postdocs, Zav and Jared, go and do this for me. This is my business card. And you see the holes in there?
Yeah.
Those holes were punched with a laser beam that was about 2.5 watts of near-infrared laser through a paper.
2.5 watts.
But it's
like
pulsed.
Nothing,
but
right?
it's pulsed, so it gives a lot of energy. So it's not something that's a continuous stream of laser of photons, but it's just a tiny blip of photons. But it's got a lot of photons coming out in one shot, and that was able to get these holes through. Now, to answer your question,
wait. If your finger had been
That's what I was
behind,
just going to say.
would that have burned?
damage would
yeah,
that
you would get pinched. I mean, you could feel the pinching if you put your hand in front of the laser.
And that's a nothing laser.
And
2.5
that's exactly
watts, right?
That's exactly why lasers are used now for things like eye surgery and so on, where you can burn tissues and so on. And you should also remember, besides the heat that light lasers produce, light also exerts a force. And you can actually use, and this is something that we don't really see. But you don't see that if you shine a laser on something, you don't see the thing moving. But in reality, there is a force exerted on an object when light shines on it. And that lies at the heart of how we can trap objects with light.
So wait, if someone took, if we go with the lightsaber thing, right?
Yes.
So in reality, if you had a lightsaber and you were pointing at someone, would it actually throw them back?
There is a force exerted on them, but you don't usually feel it because the momentum that light has doesn't exert as much force with the kind of lasers that we have right now. However, it is used in science to trap small particles, and one of the things that we have seen in movies, which have now been created in labs, is the tractor beam. So Star Trek has the tractor beam, which is used to hold things in place.
The tractor beam in Star Trek is a real thing now?
Well, it's not exactly like the tractor beam you saw in Star Trek, but the fact that you can pull and push objects with light is real. And it can actually be done in labs, and it is being demonstrated now. And
but how large are these objects we're talking about?
These are micron scale objects. Or
but will
small
they ultimately be able to size up or scale up to larger objects?
At this point, it's more about a scientific curiosity and also about using it as a tool for microscopy, for example.
If we could overcome the challenges inherent in creating a tractor beam like they use in Star Trek, what would we do? How would we do that?
So to begin with, you would need to create a beam that actually does this attractive force on an object and also can create a repulsive force, because you also want to be able to attract and pull the beam away from, push the object away. And so this is something that you can do with these donut-shaped beams. So you would need to create donut-shaped beams, but then you would need to have a lot of photons in there to be able to move something big or macroscopic. So that's why all the experiments till date have been done on smaller objects and on tabletop lasers and so on.
And would you need just a gigantic space in which to even build that kind of tractor beam and work it out?
Well, I haven't really thought through going outside the lab and building a tractor beam, but I know that...
It's time to start thinking about it, Vinod.
Okay, maybe I should get some funding for that.
No, but would you need a gigantic space to create a tractor beam as powerful as the ones that they use in Star Trek?
I think it's not that trivial to make something that big, because there's gravity playing a role, and so it'll have to be in the outer space where there's no gravity, and so it's not.
It's not about the thing that I feel like it's not about how much space you have.
Yeah.
It's really about if you can improve the technology or the technique somehow to be able to grasp these larger objects.
So the physics is being worked out. So we know what is needed to pull and push particles. Let's put it that way.
And back to these lightsabers, how come the light at the end of the lightsaber stops? So does light ever really stop?
No, light never really stops. In fact, if you take a laser beam, and I have a laser pointer here with me, and if I was to use that and shine it, all you can see is, you'll see the beam at the very end, but that's because I'm blocking it.
Right.
But if I was to just shine this laser to the up air, it's just going to go up and up.
Indefinitely? Till what?
Indefinitely, till the light beams scatter off and you don't see it.
And why is these lasers, pointers, tend to be red?
Well, that's the most common laser that
there's
is
no
small
reason
laser.
That's
has
what
to be.
kittens like to chase.
But there's no scientific reason
scientific
why it
reason
needs to be red.
yeah.
Just asking.
Yeah. In fact, the green laser pointers have become more popular lately,
Yeah.
but they're also not very safe for the eye.
I'd like a purple one if there's anybody out there that is making these.
Sure.
When you see a movie like Star Trek and you see a tractor beam, do you get excited? Does it resonate with you? Do you?
Absolutely. So what's amazing is we are living at least my generation is living at a time where we grew up seeing some of these science fiction ideas, and we're actually now being able to realize this in the lab. One good example is holograms. I mean, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of a 3D hologram?
Tupac Shakur.
Princess Leia.
No, Princess
right.
Leia,
Princess
yeah.
Leia, that's right.
Princess
Yeah.
Leia. And then there's also the holodeck in Star Trek, right, where people can talk to each other.
Yeah.
So
Is that a laser?
that's a technology that relies on a laser, because you need a laser beam to be able to create a hologram. But what we saw in these movies is 3D holograms, so which is something that is refreshing. So you're actually having a display in front of you, which is a shape of a hologram that's actually moving around and so on. And it's become a reality. I mean, people have realized a system where it's not just a hologram like you see in a book or something where you move in and out and you can see the 3D image, but you have something where this image gets refreshed at a rate which at this point I'm not sure if it is at a rate where our eye still sees it as a continuous motion, but you can rewrite the hologram, and that makes it like a real-time hologram.
Do you think that some of the technology that was developed early on in these sci-fi films and TV actually inspired science to go and try to create these things that,
Definitely. Movies and television have played a role in a lot of inspiration that we are seeing in today's science. It comes from two sides, I think. On one side, there is a natural evolution that science takes to build new products and new technologies, but there's also the inspiration that entertainment provides. And I think we give back as well. Like hologram is a good example of what entertainment might be 5 years from now, where you will have virtual concerts, for example.
According to Star Wars lore, the color of the lightsaber's blade depends on the type of focusing crystal used to create it, and the nature of the Force energy the Jedi chooses to transfer into the crystal through many days of intense meditation. Vinod, in real life, how do we change the color of light? Do you meditate?
No, but how do I change the color? So what's color? I mean, color is really decided by the frequency of the object that is emitting that light. So if you take a red laser, it could be a ruby crystal. If you take a green laser or a blue laser, it might be a gas filled with argon gas that is ionized, and that emits the green laser. So it's the medium that is sitting inside that decides the frequency of the color that comes out. Now, having said that,
I'm sorry, I just want to understand. So the color of the light that comes out starts with just matter. It can be a crystal, it can be a gas.
Exactly.
And you're shooting light through it?
No, you're providing energy to it. So it can be energy in the form of electrical current. So I have a battery in my laser pointer that provides the electricity to this crystal.
Yeah.
And then that emits the light.
So the energy that you add to the matter
creates
the light.
So you imagine something getting excited because of the current that you're providing, and then when it comes down, it emits a photon.
Could you add energy to anything and create light that way?
So any form of light that you're seeing around, your incandescent bulb, your fluorescent bulb, your LEDs, all of those are examples where energy is provided and then you're getting light out of it. And that's why the LED bulb is the most energy efficient form, because for the amount of energy you're putting in, you're getting most number of photons out of this system.
But why can't my finger make light? Like, why can't we add energy just to this and have
if
light
you
shoot out?
heat up your hand, then you can definitely start glowing.
Okay, that's true. Yeah. I would make light if you heated me up. Yeah. I get it now.
In a sense, the folklore is right, in the sense that if they're infusing these lightsabers with a particular kind of energy, it will affect the color of the lightsaber itself.
Exactly.
So they weren't too far off base.
No, they weren't.
So let's talk about other kinds of light in the movies. In the original Star Trek pilot, the crew of the Enterprise were armed with laser pistols. But according to the creator Gene Roddenberry, the production staff quickly realized that laser technology was rapidly becoming a reality, and audiences would too quickly understand what a laser could and could not do. And so they renamed the light-based weapon, calling it a phaser.
Those Star Trek guys were one of the first sci-fi productions that really wanted to ground their fiction in real science. And at first, the word phaser was an intergalactic acronym for photon maser. And Vinod, a maser is a real thing, right?
Yes. In fact, the maser is the predecessor to the laser. It was the maser that was actually
the mommy laser.
Yes.
Maser.
Well, that's a nice way to put it. But that was the first thing that was actually discovered. And the maser actually stands for microwave amplified by stimulated emission of radiation. And in fact, the Nobel Prize for a maser was awarded. The Nobel Prize was actually awarded for masers. And so they made the maser, and then about 4 or 5 years later, they made a laser with light, and they actually called it the optical maser. So in some sense, the guys had it right. It is actually a photon maser, although they decided to call it a phased energy rectifier, and that's what they like to call it.
So phased energy rectifier. So what is rectified light?
So rectified light, so to have rectified light, you need a coherent source, and people use coherent sources of light like a laser to produce a rectified signal, which is in the terahertz part of the spectrum, for example. So you use a visible laser or a near-infrared laser, and it changes the properties of a crystal, and then you get this rectified light out of it.
Both phasers and lightsabers make a very distinct sound. Does light really make sound?
No, light does not make sound, because if I shine this laser pointer as I was showing you, it does not make any sound. But the reason, but you can create sound. And the way you can create sound is if you focus a high power laser into a tiny spot, it'll start creating a plasma in the air, and you can hear the air arcing. So you'll go, you hear the sound.
Air arcing sounds like Rice Krispies?
Yes, something like that, exactly. So you can create a sound with laser, and people have done that. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can use sound to create light. So you can take a small bubble in, say, in some liquid, and you can shine ultrasound onto it, and it'll start vibrating, and when this bubble pops, you can get light out of it.
Wow.
So the reverse.
Would a handheld laser gun ever work?
It's already there. I mean, you can make a laser gun with a laser. I mean, that's not, and in fact, there's already an effort to make a laser cannon to shoot down drones and things like that. So yes, unfortunately, every good aspect of science also has a negative aspect, and here is an example of that.
Another great trope of the sci-fi world is the energy creature, a being without a body. We've seen them most recently in Steven Spielberg's Extant. In this TV series, Halle Berry plays an astronaut named Molly Woods, who goes up to space alone but comes back pregnant. And the disembodied being that impregnates her exists on the spectrum of invisible light. Is that even a thing, Vinod, the spectrum of invisible light?
Yes, there is this idea that light is everything that we see is all that is to light. But visible light is only a small fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. There is the ultraviolet that we don't see in the higher frequency ranges. And then there is the infrared part of the spectrum, which we also don't see. And then there's the far infrared and so on, and then microwaves. All of these are part of the electromagnetic spectrum. and that all we're seeing is this part of the spectrum that is visible to our human eye. And that's why what we call is visible light. So
visible light is a small part of that spectrum?
Very small part of the
Because
electromagnetic.
our senses only evolved to pick up, I guess, what's necessary in terms of perceiving the spectrum of light. I mean, there's a lot of information out there that our senses just aren't picking up. But one of the questions is, why is it that certain wavelengths of light that are outside our visual spectrum have dangerous properties to them?
So the ultraviolet, for example, has a higher frequency, which means that it can penetrate our skin much more, and it can cause more damage to our skin. So, and then X-rays have got high energy, the same reason, and so you can get mutations of your cells and so on. So that's what makes them harmful.
So it's about the wavelengths and their ability, the frequencies to be able to penetrate
and the
through
energy
matter.
that each photon carries that matters.
Do you think, Heather, that if we can't see it with our eyes, that our brain is perceiving light in some way?
Well, again, our senses evolved to pick up on certain frequencies like light and sound so that we could navigate the environment. And so I don't think that we have anything like extrasensory perception or something that's happening outside of the senses. There's certainly information that's getting in to our brain from the environment, but via the natural pathways of our senses, but that's occurring outside of awareness. So unconscious information, the brain is processing that all the time. But it's just all within our normal sensory domain. But other creatures like bats have evolved to be able to sort of see with their ears, with sonar, or certain bugs can see other parts of the spectrum of light that we can't, because they had to evolve that sensory processing mechanism to survive in their little niches where they live. So it's possible to perceive these other aspects or other wavelengths, but we just don't have the equipment to do so.
You study light. Do you feel like we know everything there is to know about the spectrum? Could there be things that even you haven't seen or detected yet?
It's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, but at least what we know as light now and we understand as electromagnetic radiation, we have a fairly reasonable understanding of that, I would say, at least in the classical sense. And there are still some weirdness of light that we are still trying to understand. For example, light can behave both as a particle and a wave. And it exhibits different properties depending on what you're looking for. So, but that's a whole different conversation to be had.
Let's move on and talk about Sue Storm.
In 1961, Sue Storm was the first female superhero created by Marvel. After surviving a deadly dose of cosmic radiation, Sue Storm awakens with the power to turn invisible. And invisibility is a property of light.
As a side note, in the 1961 comics, poor Sue could only turn herself invisible and not her clothes, which means the first female superhero in the Marvel Universe spent a lot of time naked, until 1964, when Sue gained the power to turn objects and people near her invisible also.
So Sue Storm has power over light, but what exactly is she doing to light to make herself and her clothes invisible?
So let's ask, why do we see things in the first place? The reason we see things in the first place, or some objects become visible, is because light, either the object produces light, like a bulb, or if you stand in a room with a light bulb on, then the light hits you and it comes to you and it gets reflected off you and I can see you. Now, let's imagine how to make yourself invisible then. What you would have to do is not to reflect the light. But not to reflect light and just absorb it doesn't make you invisible. You would see a black object of you. That again is not invisibility. So to make yourself invisible, what you would need to do is for the light to bend around you and go back. So that when you're standing in front of you, I would see what's behind you and imagine that you don't exist because the light is bent around you and it's coming as if it's coming from something that's in the back. So I would see the chairs behind you rather than you sitting in front of you. So you would need to bend the light around. And so you can wear a cloak that does that. I mean, that's the idea.
Is that happening now?
Yeah, is it?
Yeah.
Where can we get that?
I mean, it's a great time to ask this question because we just recently had a paper that was published from a group in Berkeley where they showed that they were able to produce a cloak of a three-dimensional object. So they put an object, it's called a carpet cloak, so it's not completely cloaking, but they put a small object under a carpet, and the question is whether if I look from the top, do I see the bump in the carpet or not? And if I cannot see the bump in the carpet, then I have cloaked that object. And they were able to show that. So it's a small step.
How?
Well, what you do is that you make this carpet out of a medium where it cancels out any of the reflections that's coming out from this small object that you're trying to hide, such that when you perceive from the top, it appears as if everything is coming at you at a straight line, and so you don't see that there's a bump.
Is it almost like noise-canceling headphones?
Well, it's a bit more trickier with light because light scatters far easier, and so it's not like you can get a feedback and do it because light is traveling so fast. So you need to do the cancellation right at that play, at the source of or where it's reflecting off.
But what is the cloak actually made of? It's incredibly thin, right?
It's thin. The one that was demonstrated recently is an extremely thin object, but it has very tiny metallic metal pieces, so gold or silver, small features on it, stamped onto it, and each of these features, what it does is it does the cancellation business and removes any artifact of this bump sitting under the carpet. And so you imagine yourself seeing just a flat, plain ground.
So it's like an illusion. I mean, it's an illusion, but playing with light, it's like a magic trick.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
So so we've looked at all these fictional uses of light, and you're touching upon some things that are happening now. But what are some other applications of light that are actually happening now, that are cutting edge?
So light's being used in communication. There's a lot of work going on in communication with pure light. In my own group, we work on systems where we try to combine properties of light and matter to create new kinds of quasi-particles that have properties of both light and matter, so that they actually talk to each other much better and actually do things similar to what the lightsaber could do, which is bounce off each other. And there has been some other work from other groups in the US that have shown similar effects. Making communication more secure using the quantum properties of light, or the basic idea that if I detect something, then it's lost. So it's the Schrodinger's cat example, where the cat is alive or dead. The same idea for the photon. The act of observation collapses the system, and so you know whether an eavesdropper tried to get into the path or not. So that's on the communication side. On the other side of medicine, there is a lot of effort with lasers, laser surgery. Lasers are used for spectroscopy and microscopy in small biological systems. There is one of the areas that I'm very excited about is optogenetics, where you're using light to turn on and off neuronal firing. And I think that's a field that's started a few years ago, but it's actually seen a rapid growth because there's a huge amount of potential for it.
So using light to change someone's brain?
This is really exciting, actually. Optogenetics, I think, is one of the greatest recent developments in applications in neuroscience. So basically, you can use light to target particular receptors and neurons to open and fire. So you can actually target a very specific circuit within the brains of fire. And they show this within rodents, where you turn on, let's say, a blue light, and it triggers a certain pathway, and you can make the rat move left, or you can another light will make it go right.
Sounds scary for mind control.
The thing is, it's done with this technique where you have to. It's a virus that is inserted that changes the sort of properties so that the receptors are responsive to light. So the question is, I mean, for you is, how likely do you think this will be able to, we can do this in humans? Because with the rodents, the skull is so thin that they can just shine the light directly through the skull. But in humans, you have to put implants so you can have the light.
Just get bald people.
So, how likely do you think that it's going to be?
Well, I think we also, right now, most of optogenetics is done at a few specific regions of the spectrum, because there are receptors that can respond to those signals. They're in the visible. But to go to deeper in the brain tissue, one would need to go to near infrared light, where light can go through and actually address neurons much deeper. So this has got huge implications for people who've had brain injuries and so on, where you can actually start doing some, not surgeries, but you can actually do therapy using this technique.
Yeah.
Vinod, you devote your professional life to studying light. What do you love about light?
Well, firstly, I think light is fantastic because the interaction of light with matter lies at the heart of the most basic form of energy we see around us, photosynthesis. And I think light is really central to not just our existence on this earth, but also to a lot of technologies we see around us. It has a lot of applications where you can like I just mentioned. So I think the combination of fundamental curiosity of what really makes light the way it has to behave, and the potential applications is what really drives me to do research in light.
Vinod, when you were growing up, did you used to watch sci-fi movies, and did that inspire you to study light?
Yes.
Which ones were meaningful to you?
Well, Star Trek was definitely one of them, and the ideas of teleportation, for example, that you see there was something that I've always been fascinated by. And there is photon teleportation now. I mean, you can actually create a photon at, or rather destroy a photon at one place and recreate.
Wait, is this the beam me up, Scotty? Is coming to reality?
Well, it's not coming to reality in the terms of beam me up, Scotty, but you can actually do that with smaller objects like particles of light.
Wow.
So, that's one example of what sci-fi. I always loved the flubber idea of the absent-minded professor. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, sci-fi. Back to the Future was always one of my favorite ones.
Yeah. Star Trek was one of the first shows that actually referred to real science in trying to create this fictionalized world, and that was what made it so special, I think.
Vinod, thank you so much for coming by today.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, and it was a great way to express everything that we've been doing in the lab and outside.
Shed a little light on it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Sorry.
Well, don't forget to check us out on the web at www.cuny.tv under the Science tab, where you'll find past shows, additional content, and a link to our app.